But when she woke up the following morning, she could hear the sound of her neighbor drilling holes into the ground, but she couldn't look away as her neighbor continued with his odd behavior. What was he doing? Did he have an infestation problem? Also, if you have not done already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. She was tempted to find out what he was up to, but when she saw him digging dirt out of the ground with his bare hands. But the holes he was drilling in the ground of his yard made her feel suspicious. Usually when new neighbors move into the neighborhood, it would be customary for them to introduce themselves to their neighbors, least of all their next-door neighbor. When Jill finally got the chance to talk to him, he seemed completely disinterested in befriending her. She asked him how he was finding everything: the move, the neighborhood, and his house. He replied with "fine" and mentioned nothing of his strange renovations to the garden. Now, she was almost certain he was hiding something. A week later, an old, rusty truck backed up to the man's property. Jill and a few other curious residents watched as long parcels were unloaded from the vehicle. What was he doing over there? This was obviously a much bigger operation than Jill thought. Was he building something? The large wooden planks lay on the side of his yard. Jill strained her eyes to see, but when her vision came into focus, she was more confused than ever. The posts protruded out of the holes in an odd formation like some kind of druid monument, which puzzled Jill and the other onlookers. As the diligent man continued to work on the strange project, a young boy emerged from the house and came over to join him. "That must be his son," said Jill to the other neighbors. She never saw him playing outside or heard him making noise as young kids do. The mystery surrounding this new neighbor grew bigger and bigger. What was he up to? The neighbors were now all fascinated by what was going on in the strange man's backyard. They watched as the young boy fetched materials and tools for the man. The kid was certainly eager to help get the project done. Jill left aggravated with no choice but to continue to watch from afar. With the wooden posts now all upright, a huge pile of gravel that appeared in the man's yard further confused the curious residents. It appeared that the man and his son had been working on the foundations for some kind of structure, and she was ready to start a war if it was going to ruin the aesthetics of the well-kept neighborhood. Before long, more lumber and construction materials arrived at the house, and it became clearer that the man was building something ambitious. There were some new faces turning up too. But who were they, and why did he need so much help? Jill and her neighbors heard a lot of commotion coming from the yard as more laborers piled in. Before long, the structure seemed at least halfway completed. More recognizable elements of the structure started to emerge. Was it a small storage hut? It became apparent that this structure was some kind of holding space, but for what? For who? Kids were getting ready to go back to school, and the leaves were changing from green to beautiful shades of brown and red. He must not have wanted word to get out. If he was a private man, the last thing he'd want would be for his neighbors to find out about what he was doing to his backyard. Just when Jill and her neighbors thought the project was finally about to be revealed, something strange happened. The man had put away his tools and materials and covered it all up. Since the weather was getting colder and construction was getting harder, it looked like he would have to wait until next spring to complete his many months of work. The man needed to make accessing the pool safer. He wanted the deck to be a place of leisure, somewhere to relax and look over the pool while basking beneath the sizzling sun. So, how did his DIY skills work out? The end result was something stunning. A professional contractor couldn't have done a better job. Sturdy beams held the floor in place, seams were met perfectly, angles were carefully measured, and all edges were beveled for decoration. They also added a set of gray and brown deck chairs and tables so they could lounge in the sun after a cool swim. A lot of people think they can nail a few boards together and knock up something like this in a few months. Doing your own construction, even small fixes around the house, can save you a ton of money. For example, a plumber costs hundreds, but replacing your own toilet pump can come in at under $50. But there's more to DIY than just saving money. It's no secret that there's a large amount of pride attached to accomplishing something yourself, especially when you get to gaze upon your creation every day. A few weeks passed, and Jill enjoyed watching all of the new additions that her neighbor had been adding to his backyard. She'd sit by her window and occasionally check up on his progress. She loved being neighborly and slept a bit sounder, knowing that her neighbors were good people. But her perspective would change soon. She watched the process. He'd melt down some aluminum into a liquid, and then he'd carefully pour it into the ground. Her lovely neighbor was pouring the liquid into anthills. She couldn't understand why someone would do something like this. Jill approached the fence and waved her neighbor over. He had a smile on his face until he saw that she clearly wasn't impressed. Her neighbor explained that what he was doing was art. But before she could think of a retort, he walked back to the anthill and cracked it open. Jill felt melancholic at the sight of a destroyed ant nest. But things weren't as they appeared. This was a step she'd never seen before. What was he about to do to prove he was right? It was kind of like a 3D model of the passages the ants had created. But she still hated the idea of what it cost. The poor ants. She started her argument back up, but he quickly put it to rest. Her neighbor put all of her worries to rest as soon as he explained that the anthills he did this to were always uninhabited. He explained that he and his son were working on a science project for his school. He further explained that his son needed some kind of model that showed how ants lived. It was for his junior science class, and the clever dad thought of an easy way to show exactly how their tunnels worked. All for his son. But her neighbor reassured her that he'd want someone to put him in his place if he were doing something inhumane. He smiled and accepted the offer. The two hit it off and became good neighbors. There were no more misunderstandings now that, in order to protect the privacy of those depicted, some names, locations, and identifying characteristics have been changed and are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblances to actual events or places or persons, living or deed, are entirely coincidental. Becoming good neighbors.